My name is Linda Parker, and I am 75 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, a city where cobblestone streets and centuries-old houses whisper stories of the past. I never thought I would be the one to share a story like this one that begins with something as simple as a birthday dinner, but unravels into betrayal, heartbreak, and a revelation no one saw coming. Before we dive into family betrayal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. That evening, the restaurant glowed with soft golden lights against the old brick walls. Family and friends gathered to celebrate my birthday. I had chosen my dress carefully, not because it was new or fashionable, but because it meant something to me. It was the same dress I had worn decades earlier on my wedding anniversary. Over the years, I had tucked it away, treating it almost like a treasure. For me, it wasn't just fabric, it was memory sacrifice and love stitched into every seam. Wearing it on my birthday felt like honoring the life I had built and the family I had poured myself into. But as soon as I walked into that room, before I could even sit down, laughter cut through the air. And the source of that laughter was my daughter, Melissa. She looked at me and smirked, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, Mom, what are you wearing?" That looks like something straight out of the 1950s. Did you pull it from a thrift store costume rack? A few guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or to look away. Some kept their eyes on their plates, pretending not to notice, and me, I forced a smile. I lifted my chin as if the words didn't matter, but inside I felt the sting. My own daughter, the child I had worked and sacrificed for, had chosen to humiliate me on my birthday in front of everyone. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I didn't even let a tear fall. Instead, I stayed quiet, because I knew something no one else in that room knew. I knew that this night was not just about cake, candles, and a few photographs to post on social media. This night held a truth that would stop every laugh cold. Later that evening, when the plates were cleared and the wine glasses sat empty, my lawyer, Mr. Grant, would step forward. He would open the sealed envelope I had handed him weeks before, and he would read the first line of my will aloud. Just one line, just one sentence, and it would change everything forever. Before I go on, let me ask you, have you ever been mocked by someone you love over something small, yet it cut you deeper than anything else? A meal, a habit, or the way you dress? Words can wound in ways we don't forget. If you've ever felt that sting, I'd like you to share your story in the comments. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. When I think back over my life, it sometimes feels like a patchwork quilt, pieces of hardship stitched together with threads of love. I wasn't born into wealth, and nothing ever came easy. But I had a husband I adored, and 2 children I thought would be my greatest legacy, my daughter Melissa and my son David. We started our life together in Savannah, Georgia, just a couple of hours south of where I live now. Savannah was and still is a city full of beauty. The moss hanging from the live oaks, the cobblestone squares, the gentle rhythm of the riverboats. Everything about that place gave me hope, even when times were tough. My husband Robert worked as a mechanic, and I worked part-time at a diner while raising the children. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and I thought that was enough. When Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, my world shattered. Melissa was only 15 and David was 12. Overnight, I went from being a wife and homemaker to being a single mother, the sole provider. I had no choice but to take on extra work. I cleaned houses during the day and worked late-night shifts at the diner. There were weeks when I was so tired I could barely stand, but I never wanted my children to feel like they were missing out on love, even if money was tight. I learned to stretch every dollar. I patched school uniforms, cooked simple meals that could last 2 or 3 days, and sewed clothes when Melissa wanted something new, but we couldn't afford it. I'll never forget the first time she asked for a store-bought dress for the school dance. I didn't have the heart to say no, so I took in extra shifts, scrubbing floors until my hands ached, just to make sure she could walk into that gymnasium feeling like every other girl. When she twirled in front of the mirror, her eyes sparkling, I thought to myself, this is worth everything. David, on the other hand, was always my quiet child. He didn't demand much. He understood, even as a boy, that life was hard for me. He'd sit with me in the kitchen while I mended clothes, talking softly, helping with little things. Sometimes he'd peel potatoes for dinner or sweep the floor without being asked. He never made me feel small for what I couldn't provide. He only made me feel loved. Melissa was different. Even as a teenager, she had opinions about everything: what I wore, how I cooked, even how I spoke. She wanted to be part of a world bigger than ours. By the time she turned 18, she was determined to leave Savannah behind. She earned a scholarship to study fashion design in New York, and I was proud, truly proud. I thought all those long nights working and saving had been worth it. My daughter was reaching for the stars, but pride has a shadow, and in Melissa's case, it was distance. The further she climbed in her career, the further she seemed to drift from me. Every phone call was shorter, every visit more strained. She began to talk about me in ways that made me feel old-fashioned, outdated, like a relic from another century. At first, I brushed it off. She's young, I told myself. She'll grow out of it. But as the years passed, it only deepened. By contrast, David stayed close. He chose to work locally, managing a small landscaping business. Some said he lacked ambition, but I knew better. His ambition was family. He wanted to be there for me. When my knees began to ache and climbing stairs felt like a mountain, it was David who stopped by to carry groceries or mow the lawn. He never made a show of it. He never sought praise. He simply showed up. And here's where life is funny. One child gave me 1,000 reasons to brag to others: her job, her travels, her big city success. But the other child gave me peace. Between the two, I realized peace is the more precious gift. Still, a mother's heart doesn't stop hoping. I wanted Melissa to love me not just as her mother, but as a woman worthy of respect. Every time she visited, I tried a little harder. I cooked her favorite meals. I asked about her work. I listened as she spoke about runways and fabrics I couldn't even imagine. I smiled even when I didn't understand. And yet almost every time there was a comment, a remark about my hair, my clothes, or my simple ways. Each time, it was like a tiny pinprick. And over the years, those pinpricks became wounds. That is why the dress mattered so much, the one she laughed at during my birthday. That dress wasn't chosen at random. It was the same dress I had worn when Robert surprised me on our 20th anniversary. He had taken me out to dinner in Savannah, saving up for weeks just to afford one night at a fine restaurant. I had felt beautiful in that dress, loved in that dress. To me, it was more than fabric. It was a reminder that even in the hardest of times, love had carried me through. But to Melissa, it was nothing but an old rag, something to laugh at. And the tragedy is, she didn't even realize how deep her words cut. If you've ever raised children, you know this truth. You can pour your entire soul into them, but you cannot control who they become. You can sacrifice every dollar, every ounce of strength, and still watch them look at you as if you are less. That's the risk of motherhood. That's the gamble of love. By the time of my 75th birthday, the cracks between Melissa and me were wide enough to swallow whole rooms. Still, I thought maybe, just maybe, the evening would remind her of what we once shared. I was wrong. And yet I had been preparing for that moment for longer than she realized. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The night of my 75th birthday was supposed to be simple. I had told David I didn't want a big fuss, just dinner with family. But Melissa insisted on something more formal. She said it would be classier to book a private dining room at a Charleston restaurant she liked to frequent whenever she came home. I agreed, though my heart longed for something more intimate, just the comfort of family around my old oak table at home. The restaurant was lovely, though, the kind with white tablecloths, polished glasses, and waiters in crisp black vests. Through the tall windows, the evening light spilled across the streets of Charleston, where horse-drawn carriages still clip-clopped over cobblestones. For a moment, as I entered the room, I felt almost regal. I wore the dress. My dress. The one Robert had loved so much. I had brushed my hair carefully, pinned a brooch at the collar, and told myself, tonight I will not feel old. Tonight I will feel proud. And then Melissa laughed. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was sharp like glass breaking. She leaned back in her chair, waving her hand as if to draw attention. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "are you seriously wearing that? It looks like something out of a thrift shop from the 50s. Some of her friends snickered. A cousin coughed into his napkin. David shot Melissa a look that could have burned holes in the table, but he said nothing. And me. I felt the room tilt for a moment, as though every eye was on me, waiting to see if I would crumble. I smiled instead, a thin, practiced smile. I said nothing, because silence can be more powerful than any defense, but inside my chest felt hollow. That dress carried decades of love, and in an instant she had reduced it to a punchline. The dinner went on, plates of shrimp and grits, baskets of cornbread, glasses of wine. It all blurred together. I hardly tasted a thing. Melissa chattered with her friends about runway shows in New York, about fabrics and trends, as if her comment had vanished into the air. But it hadn't. Not for me. Not for David, either. I saw the storm brewing behind his eyes. When dessert was cleared and the candles had burned low, I nodded to David. He rose quietly and slipped out of the room. A few minutes later, the door opened again, not for a waiter, but for Mr. Grant, my attorney. He was an older gentleman, steady and calm, carrying a leather folder under his arm. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Conversations faltered. Chairs creaked as people turned to look at him. Melissa frowned. "Mom, what is this?" she asked. I folded my hands in my lap. "This," I said softly, "is something I've been meaning to share." Mr. Grant opened the folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. His voice, deep and deliberate, filled the room. "This is the last will and testament of Mrs. Linda Parker," he announced. The room stilled. Melissa's jaw tightened. David sat straighter, his hands clasped together. Mr. Grant cleared his throat and began to read. "To my beloved children, Melissa and David, this document reflects not just my wishes for the future, but the lessons of a lifetime. And to the daughter who mocked me on my last birthday outfit, you shall not receive any portion of my estate." The words hit like thunder. A gasp escaped from someone at the table. Forks clattered against plates. Melissa's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't breathe. What she whispered then louder, "What? That's ridiculous. You're joking." But no one was laughing now. Mr. Grant continued steady as stone. "My estate, including all properties and financial accounts, shall be entrusted to my son David Parker, with the understanding that he will honor our family's values and ensure that love and respect, not mockery, guide our legacy." Melissa slammed her hand against the table. "This isn't fair. You can't do this to me, Mom. It was just a joke. Everyone jokes about clothes." I finally looked her in the eyes. My voice was calm, though my heart pounded. "Melissa, it wasn't about the dress. It was about respect. You laughed at more than fabric. You laughed at me, at everything I've stood for. And respect, once broken, is harder to repair than any garment." The silence that followed was heavy. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some staring at their plates, others stealing glances between mother and daughter. Melissa's voice cracked. "You can't possibly mean this, after everything I've done in my career, everything I've achieved." "Exactly," I interrupted. "Everything you've achieved, but at the cost of forgetting where you came from. Success means little if it leaves no room for kindness." David reached for my hand under the table. His grip was firm, reassuring. His eyes glistened, though he held back tears. In that moment, I saw not just my son, but the man who had quietly stood by me all these years. Melissa shook her head, her voice growing shrill. "You're making a mistake. Everyone in this room knows I'm the one who can carry this family name forward. Not David. He's small town. He doesn't understand the world like I do." But her words rang hollow. Everyone in the room could see the difference, David's quiet devotion versus Melissa's pride. I sat taller in my chair. This isn't about who understands the world. It's about who understands family. Melissa fell silent then, though her eyes burned with disbelief. The reading went on line by line, spelling out the details. The modest home I lived in, the savings I had tucked away, the properties Melissa didn't even know I had invested in years ago, all were secured under David's name with instructions to use them wisely and generously. When Mr. Grant finished, he closed the folder and looked around the room. No one spoke. The truth had landed heavy and undeniable. Melissa stared at me, tears brimming, but pride holding them back. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to find the words. The silence stretched until finally she pushed her chair back, the scrape echoing across the polished floor. Without a word, she stormed out the door, slamming shut behind her. The room remained still, as if everyone was afraid to breathe. And then slowly, I let out the breath I had been holding. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The truth was out. The slam of that dining room door still echoed in my ears long after Melissa had gone. For a moment, no one moved. Forks and knives lay, abandoned wine glasses stood half full, and an awkward silence wrapped itself around the table like a heavy curtain. I could feel every eye on me searching for some explanation, some justification. It was David who broke the silence. He squeezed my hand again and whispered, "Mom, you did the right thing." Melissa's friends looked stunned, exchanging quick glances, as though they had just witnessed something they could never unsee. A few relatives shifted in their chairs, uncomfortable but unwilling to say anything. Respect kept their lips sealed. But Melissa wasn't done with me. 10 minutes later, she came back. Her cheeks were red, her eyes watery, but her pride was intact. She stormed back into that dining room, pointing a finger at me. "You can't just humiliate me like that, Mom," she snapped. "In front of everyone. You think this makes you look strong? No, it makes you look bitter and spiteful." I stood slowly, my knees aching, but my voice steady. "Melissa," I said, "sit down." "I will not sit down," she barked. "You think you're teaching me a lesson? You've ruined your own reputation. Everyone will think you've lost your mind disinheriting your daughter over a dress." The room tensed again. Some of the guests avoided her gaze. Others watched her wide-eyed, as if finally seeing her true self. "Melissa," I said quietly, "this isn't about a dress. It never was. It's about years of words, small cutting words that chipped away at respect, chipped away at love. Tonight was only the last straw." She folded her arms, glaring at me like a child defying punishment. "So what? David gets everything. You think he deserves it more than I do. He doesn't have the career I've built. He doesn't have the connections, the education." "That's true," I interrupted gently. "He doesn't have those things. What he does have is respect. He has loyalty. He has kindness. Those are the things that matter when the rest of the world turns cold." Her lip trembled, but her anger kept it firm. "This isn't fair. I worked my entire life to make you proud. I became someone important, someone who can carry this family name forward. And you repay me by embarrassing me like this?" At that, I finally let the years pour out. My voice wavered, but I refused to let it break. "Melissa, I said I worked my entire life too. I scrubbed floors. I sewed clothes. I went hungry so you could eat. I stayed up nights worrying when you didn't call, praying when you moved far away. And still, I loved you. Still, I tried to show up for you in every way I knew how. But love without respect, it feels like ashes. Tonight you laughed at more than a dress. You laughed at your mother, and I cannot allow that to be rewarded." The words hung there. Melissa blinked rapidly, perhaps realizing for the first time the depth of the wound she had left. But pride is a thick wall, and hers would not crumble so easily. She tried again. "You can't possibly leave everything to David. What do you even have worth leaving?" "Some savings. This old house in Charleston." That was when I let the truth surface, the truth I had guarded for years. I looked at Mr. Grant and nodded. He opened another folder and slid out a document. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "do you wish me to explain the extent of your estate?" I nodded again. He cleared his throat. Alongside the Charleston home, Mrs. Parker owns 3 properties in Savannah, Georgia. Purchased over 30 years ago, these properties have significantly appreciated in value due to the tourism and historic preservation movement. Current valuation, conservatively estimated, exceeds $3 million. A murmur rippled through the room. I could almost hear hearts skipping beats. Melissa's jaw dropped. Her friends whispered to each other in disbelief. She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. $3 million, she whispered. You You've been living modestly all these years and you—" She stopped herself. I finished for her. "Yes, I invested quietly, Melissa. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't broadcast it because wealth doesn't mean much without wisdom. I lived simply because simplicity brought me peace. But that does not mean I was blind or foolish." David sat frozen shock in his eyes, but gratitude too. Melissa's voice cracked again. "You mean to tell me you let me believe you had nothing while you had all of this?" "Why?" "Because," I said softly, "I wanted to see how you would treat me without it." That truth broke something open in the room. People gasped, nodded knowingly, some even wiping tears. Melissa shook her head violently. "You tricked me. You set me up." "No," I said gently but firmly. "Life set you up. I simply gave you time to show me who you truly are." The silence after that was almost holy. Melissa slumped back into her chair, defeated for the first time in her life. David reached for my hand again. His eyes were damp and his voice was quiet. "Mom," he said, "I'll honor this. I'll use it wisely, not just for me, but for the family, for the community. You can trust me." I smiled at him, my heart swelling. "I know you will, David. That's why I chose you. Not because you're perfect, but because you see people, you respect people. And that's the greatest legacy I can pass on." Melissa covered her face with her hands, shaking her head as tears finally slipped free. But it was too late. The truth was written. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because I had punished my daughter, but because I had finally chosen myself, my dignity, my worth, my peace. And that turning point was not just for me. It was for everyone in that room who had ever felt small under someone else's shadow. It was a reminder that silence can be broken, and that even in the twilight of life, we can still claim our voice. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. When the room finally cleared and the night came to a close, I sat in the quiet, listening to the distant sounds of Charleston streets. The laughter, the shock, the tension, they had all faded into silence. Only David remained, helping me gather my things. His hand rested on my shoulder, steady and warm. "Mom," he whispered, "you've carried so much alone. Maybe now you can finally rest." His words sank deep. For so long I had carried not just the weight of survival, but the weight of expectation. Expectation that one day Melissa would look at me and see more than just a woman in an old dress. That she would see the sacrifices behind the seams, the love in every stitch, the history behind every quiet act of giving. But her pride had blinded her. And yet, even in the face of what people might call family betrayal, I found that anger was not the answer. As I walked slowly out of that dining room, leaning on my cane, I realized that bitterness would only chain me to the very pain I wanted freedom from. Forgiveness, though difficult, was the only way forward. I am not saying I forgave instantly. No, forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It is a choice you make every day. I chose not to let Melissa's laughter echo in my head forever. I chose not to let her disrespect define my worth. Instead, I prayed that one day she would look back and understand, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I wanted her to grow. The Bible says, "Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." Exodus 20:12. It is one of the oldest lessons in Scripture, and yet one of the easiest to forget. Respect and honor are not outdated traditions. They are the foundation of family. Without them, even the wealthiest home feels empty. And so I thought of Melissa storming away into the night, and I asked myself, what will she carry from this? Will she remember only the sting of losing an inheritance, or will she one day realize that love and respect are worth more than $3 million? My hope, fragile as it may be, is that she will choose the latter. I also thought of David. My quiet son, often overshadowed, had shown me what loyalty looked like. He had proven that respect is not demanded, but earned through countless small actions over the years. To him, inheritance was never the point. He valued the bond. That is why, when I looked at him that night, I felt not triumph, but peace. Life has a way of teaching us through contrasts. The arrogance of one child revealed the humility of the other. The mockery of a daughter made the kindness of a son shine brighter. It reminded me of an old saying, "Respect is earned, not given." David had earned it through love. Melissa had squandered it through pride. But here's the truth. I want you, the listener, to take away. Forgiveness is still possible. Not because Melissa deserves it, but because I deserve peace. To forgive is not to excuse. To forgive is to release myself from the chains of resentment. I can still hold her accountable, still draw boundaries, but I do not need to carry hatred in my heart. And if you've lived long enough, you know that betrayal within a family can cut deeper than any wound. Family betrayal is not about stolen money or broken promises. It is about the moments when respect vanishes, when words become weapons, when love is taken for granted. But even in those moments, we have a choice. We can let bitterness consume us, or we can let dignity guide us. George Eliot once wrote, "It is never too late to be what you might have been." At 75, I choose to believe that. It is never too late to stand tall, never too late to claim respect, never too late to extend forgiveness, and never too late to hope that love can be reborn in time. So tonight, as I lay down to rest, I whisper a prayer for Melissa that she may see the truth one day, a prayer for David that he may carry this legacy with honor, and a prayer for myself that my heart may remain soft even after all it has endured. And now I turn to you. Yes, you who are listening to this story. Have you ever been in a place where someone you loved mocked or dismissed you? Have you ever carried the sting of words that cut too deep? Or maybe you've been on the other side. Maybe you spoke too quickly, laughed too harshly, forgetting how fragile a parent's heart can be. If so, let this story be your reminder. Call your mother. Call your father, look them in the eyes and tell them what they mean to you. Do it while you still can. Don't let careless words be the last memory they hold of you. And before you go, I'd love for you to share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a moment of family betrayal? How did you overcome it? Leave your story in the comments. I promise someone out there needs to hear it. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Together, we can keep these stories alive, stories that remind us of the power of respect, the pain of betrayal, and the healing that only forgiveness can bring. Because in the end, wealth fades, beauty fades, even pride fades. But love, forgiveness, and respect, those are the things that remain.